This episode is brought to you by iZotope. Our friends over at iZotope create the most thoughtfully and intuitively designed software for audio repair, mixing, and mastering. I use their tools every day for the podcast, and I love it. And I think you will too. Go over to iZotope.com and check it out. That's iZotope.com. iZotope. Use the code FRET10 at checkout for a 10% discount. That's all caps, F-R-E-T, and the number 10.
Allow me to live and breathe like a man.
You've heard his words on classic albums like Pacific Ocean Blue and Friends. His 1969 collaboration with Brian Wilson, A World of Peace Must Come, gained almost legendary status as one of pop's most storied lost albums, before being resurrected to great acclaim by Light in the Attic in 2008. Now you're cordially invited to take a trip into the mind of poet and songwriter Stephen J. Kalinich. Heyday Again Records presents I Love My Life, a postcard from one of the last standing poets of peace and excitation. Order your copy today. I Love My Life by Stephen J. Kalinich and Friends. You'll see why heavy hitters like Brian Wilson, Dennis Wilson, Paul McCartney, Steve Cropper, P.F. Sloan, and Diana Ross have all worked with him. I Love My Life by Stephen J. Kalinich. Order today at realgonemusic.com. Again, that's realgonemusic.com.
You okay? You want to take a break?
No.
I mean, this is the record that will bring it all right to the forefront, man.
It does. This one does for me.
Yeah, and for as much optimism as it has, and it has a lot of optimism, there's a lot of heartbreak there.
There's a lot of doubt. Brian was experiencing a lot of doubt, and it's almost like he knew what was waiting around the corner for him. The doubt that would trip him up after Smile is very much implanted in these tracks, and the romantic doubt is there, and God only knows. Welcome to another episode of Discograffiti's wildly in-depth Beach Boys series and Your Dreams Come True, where Brian Wilson freaks like you and me get our chance to delve deep into the barely believable history and prodigious discography of my favorite band of all time, and also coincidentally the best, along with a slew of over 50 top-shelf guests, ranging from musicians inspired by their work, family members, documentary directors, songwriting collaborators, Beach Boys authors, producers, touring band members, and for good measure, some of the Beach Boys themselves. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and special thanks goes out to co-producers Chuck Granata, Dennis Dyken, and Mark Freed, without whom this series would not have happened. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, along with our special guest, author and pet sounds expert Chuck Granata. This is episode 4, an examination of everything you'll ever need to know about the classic first track on side 2 of Pet Sounds, often considered the Beach Boys' greatest song of all time, God Only Knows. Here's just a few of the many things that Chuck discusses in episode 4 of Discograffiti's Pet Sounds Deep Dive series. The Lovin Spoonful song that likely inspired the writing of God Only Knows. Notwithstanding the song's controversial title, the other instance of that very title being utilized in another composition a decade earlier. The compositional aspect that makes it completely unique in Brian Wilson's songwriting canon. A smattering of reactions from some of the biggest songwriting talents alive. The implications of Brian moving production over to 8-track at Columbia Studio. Brian's coaching advice to his brother Carl before his classic vocal take, and how both Chuck and I connect with God Only Knows in a laid-bare, explicitly personal way. If you're a Beach Boys superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the director's cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features 15 additional minutes of essential material. And you can find it in our Patreon shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Or better yet, just subscribe for access to the complete versions of all our shows. I recommend the Lieutenant tier at the very least, so you can access those director's cuts, because they include every last moment that was intended for these episodes. But it's actually the major tier that you want if you want it all. So here's what you're missing this week if you're not a Patreon member. If you're a member at the private tier, you're missing out on the director's cut of part 2 of our Graham Nash interview, which focuses on CSNY's classic second LP, Deja Vu, plus an exclusive interview with Alan Robinson, the French horn player on God Only Knows. If you're a member at the Lieutenant tier, you're missing out on the Alan Robinson interview. And if you're a member at the Major tier, well, you're not missing a thing. But even if you're on the fence, just head over there, because it's finally free to become a basic member. And you don't want to miss being notified about every single one of these episodes. Because coming up, we got an interview with Lenny Waronker, Denny Tedesco on his incredible new documentary, The Immediate Family, Al Jardine, Bruce Johnston, Tony Asher, Jimmy Webb, Kim Fowley, Phil Ramone, Paul Tanner, Larry Knechtel, Don Randy, Dominic Priori, Bob Irwin, Mark Lynette, Billy Strange, Hal Blaine, Larry Levine, the Four Freshmen's manager Bill Wagner, Carol Kay, plus an incredibly special Graham Nash deep dive, in which Graham himself rates and discusses everything he's ever released. That means solo, CSN, CSNY, CNN, and for good measure, Crosby's If I Could Only Remember My Name. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then. All right, we're back with the Pet Sounds Deep Dive, the most granular experience of all time, and we actually had to break between side 1 and side 2 and flipping the record because we dived so deep that Chuck and I actually had to get treatment for the bends. So now we're back. The hospital has released us, and we are back and at your service with side 2 of Pet Sounds. Chuck, how you doing, man?
Things are good. Of course, I've re-immersed in the whole Pet Sounds experience, and it's bringing back such great, wonderful memories of working on this book and speaking to all the amazing participants, and of course, listening to the music, which I immersed myself in so deeply that I could literally hear snippets of melodies and lyrics when I was sleeping. That's when I was working on the book. And, I put it aside for a long time, and I've been working on other things. And to come back to it and start really listening actively and closely again has been a great experience for me. So thank you for doing this, Dave.
You're welcome. Hey, thank you. All right, let's get going. There's a tremendous amount to talk about on side 2. Let's get going with a real barn burner here. God Only Knows. The first track of side 2, written by Brian and Tony. It's often praised as one of the greatest songs of all time, deservedly so, and many consider it to be the Beach Boys' finest record. The lyrics of this song are expressed from the perspective of a narrator who is asserting that life without their partner could only be fathomed by God, who, it's worth noting and really kind of staying on for a little bit as we talk about this song. God was an entity that had been considered taboo lyrically to name in the title or just a lyric of a pop song. For that reason and very many others, God Only Knows marked a departure for Brian, who for this song enlisted about 20 session musicians who played drums, sleigh bells, plastic orange juice cups, clarinets, flutes, strings, French horn, accordion, guitars, upright bass, harpsichord, and a tack piano with its strings taped. Carl Wilson, Brian's brother, sang lead, and his performance became really his signature performance. It's considered Carl's best singing ever, and Brian himself and Bruce Johnston provided additional harmonies, which we'll talk about more in depth as we go along. This song very famously ends with a series of heartbreaking, repeating vocal rounds, which was another device that was kind of uncommon for popular music at that time. This was actually probably the world's greatest B-side. It was the B-side of Wouldn't It Be Nice in July 1966, and it peaked at number 39 on Billboard. In other countries, this was flipped, and it became the single's A-side. It reached the top 10 in the UK, Canada, Norway, and the Netherlands. In 2004, it was included in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's 500 Songs That Shaped Rock and Roll. And in 2021, it was ranked number 11 in Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. Chuck, why don't we talk about the inspiration behind the song?
Well, this really is such an important recording, as you mentioned, not just in Brian Wilson's canon, but in the overarching pantheon of pop music. Tony felt that it was the pair's most effortless collaboration, remembering that Brian spent more time tweaking the instrumental part than writing the words. Recalling God Only Knows, Brian himself acknowledged that he had not written that kind of song before and explained that he thought Tony had a musical influence on him somehow. Quote, after 10 years, I started thinking about it deeper, and I remember him talking about the 1944 standard Stella by Starlight, and he had a certain love for classical songs. Asher later concurred that he felt he had inspired Brian to write the song. In his own 1991 memoir, Brian stated that the melody for God Only Knows was actually derived from a John Sebastian song that he had been listening to. When presented with this, Asher and Sebastian said they were unaware of any such connection. Biographer Mark Dillon actually suggested that Wilson's inspiration would likely have been the vocal layering on You Didn't Have to Be So Nice, which was a recent hit by Sebastian's band, the Lovin Spoonful, and it would make sense that Brian would have heard that. In later interviews, Brian said he wrote God Only Knows as an attempt to match the standard of Rubber Soul. In his recollection, he was under the influence of marijuana and was so blown away with Rubber Soul that he sat at his piano and began writing God Only Knows. Asked about Pet Sounds in various interviews, Brian frequently emphasized the album's spiritual qualities, saying he had held prayer sessions with Carl and kind of made the making of the album a religious ceremony. Parenthetically, when I spoke to Ross Barber, he told me that a lot of what the four freshmen drew on in their interpretations of some of the vocals that they did was really based on the early Catholic Church tunes that were part of the Mass. So this kind of fits together in a way. Now, writing in his book about the album, Jim Fusilli noted a closing phrase Wilson had once written to Marilyn in 1964, "Yours till God wants us apart." In a 1976 radio interview, Brian said that the song was not written for anyone in particular. Marilyn, who felt that much of the lyrical content on Pet Sounds was aimed at her, commented, "I'm the only one here, so it must be about me." Then I would think, no, it wasn't.
Honestly, that quote right there, that must be her outlook on every single song on Pet Sounds every single day of her life since 1966. It's got to just be back and forth between, oh, that's definitely me. Oh, wait, no, maybe that's Carol Mountain. So let's talk about the lyrics. At the time that this song was written, as we had mentioned before, you did not reference God in a title or a lyric. It was considered taboo for pop music. Actually, it was something that the Honeys had done several years prior, and they had stubbed their toe on the road of success in attempting to do something like this for one of their songs, and we talk about it in my interview with Ginger Blake and Marilyn Wilson Rutherford. There had been at least one recent instance of a record being banned from radio for having words like hell or damn, although it's been suggested that this was the first pop song to mention God in the title. Another song with a similar lyrical message called God Only Knows was actually recorded in 1954 by the Capris, who was a doo-wop combo. And Tony Asher said that he and Wilson had lengthy conversations about the lyric, which is quaint by today's standards. But back then, this was a big deal. Are we going to release the song with that title, or are we going to amend it somehow? And I'm quoting Tony here, because unless you were Kate Smith and you were singing God Bless America, no one thought you could say God in a song. Tony believed that they would never get any airplay. He believed that Brian agreed to the title after being told by other people that it was an opportunity to be really far out because it would cause some controversy, which he didn't mind.
You know, this is really an important cultural moment as well. Because if you think about it, okay, you had the Vietnam War going on. There was a lot of protest. We had civil unrest, which was also centered around a religious figure, Dr. Martin Luther King. And at the same time, it was the beginning of the public outcry by Madalyn Murray O'Hair to take God out of the schools and remove God from the Pledge of Allegiance. So it's this shift, not just in music, but as a culture in America. So this song coming out, being completely non-religious, being completely innocuous in terms of taking a stance on religion at all, had this beautiful kind of spiritual feel to it. And it said God in the lyric, you know, and I think they were right.
All of the things I've read about the prayer sessions and about a quest and a bid for spirituality in their music that transcended and went way beyond the woodies and the surfing, which, let's face it, was really just a metaphor that Brian was hijacking for some much more profound ideas and lyrics. You know, this was him finally literally grabbing onto that and really, you know, getting the most out of the kind of music that he was wanting to make.
Exactly.
You know, Marilyn interpreted the opening lines as autobiographical from Brian's point of view. I'm going to quote Marilyn here. He knew that I was there and that I would never leave him, so he knew that he could abuse me, even though he didn't try to. I was never number one. I was always 2 or 3. But if I would leave in some kind of a way, he would get totally distraught. Let's talk about the composition of the song.
I think this is, again, Brian at his musical best. This is true complexity in both instrumental arrangement and the vocal chart. It's just really amazing the way he constructed this. He said, it's not really in any one key. It's a strange song. That's just the way it was written. It's the only song I've ever written that's not in a definite key, and I've written hundreds of songs. That was Brian Wilson speaking about God Only Knows in 2008. Now, the song contains a recurring melodic motif that's reinforced by the lead vocal and the line played on French horn. While some commenters have characterized Pet Sounds as a Baroque pop album, musicologist John Howland argued that God Only Knows is the album's only track that can be described as such, and I would agree with that.
Paul McCartney, who every other sentence that he utters in public seems to be about this song, has over and over described it as the greatest song ever written. Amusingly to me, his 1976 song Silly Love Songs incorporates a buildup of vocal counterpoints in a style that's supposed to be similar to this. And it's amusing to me because, and I mean this in the best possible sense because I love Wings, but that is a dumb song.
But hold on.
It's a proudly dumb song, but it doesn't have the sort of musical sophistication and genius that.
All right. So we're going to differ for a moment on this because I use Silly Love Songs, which, by the way, was written tongue in cheek. You know, Paul McCartney was poking fun at himself and his industry, right?
Sure.
You know, so you have to take it in that context. But in terms of musicality and complexity, I would be hard-pressed to find a more erudite and funky bass line than on Silly Love Songs.
That's a great bass line.
So musical.
I agree with you there. The bass line's terrific, but the song as a song has a flat non-sophistication that's suiting of it.
But to the point of the song, don't all Silly Love Songs?
I'm just saying, in some ways, it's a polar opposite to its inspiration.
Oh, I would agree. I would agree. But I like the way Paul integrated that little element, you know, that musical phrase into it.
Listen, to me, Wings is inviolable. I love
Me too.
Wings. Even
I will defend them to the end of the earth. I'm telling you.
Me too. So in 2002, Brian and Paul McCartney performed God Only Knows as a duet at the Adopt a Minefield benefit gala in Los Angeles. Paul later said that he was so overwhelmed by Brian's presence that he broke down during the soundcheck rehearsals. Barry Gibb said the song blew the top of his head off. To quote him, "My first thought was, oh dear, I'm wasting my time. How can I ever compete with that?" Margot Guryan said that the song inspired her to pursue a career in pop music instead of jazz piano. And if you get her box set, you can hear that there was a tremendous amount of that kind of work before she took that left turn. And then she retained the jazz piano in a sophisticated pop style. She said, quote, "I freaked when a friend played me the song. I thought it was just gorgeous. I bought the record and played it 1,000,000 times, then sat down and wrote Think of Rain." And finally, Pete Townsend said God Only Knows is simple and elegant and was stunning when it first appeared. It still sounds perfect.
You know, both musically and technically, Brian never duplicated the wondrous feats he accomplished with writing, performing, and producing God Only Knows. And I make that as a declarative statement. Journalist Nick Kent quoted Brian, who said, "If God Only Knows is the greatest song ever written, then I'll never write anything as good again. And if I never write anything as good, then I'm finished. I'm a has-been and a wash-up, just like everyone else keeps saying." Now, I mean, I will take a little bit of offense to anyone saying that Brian was ever washed up, because as we know, decades after God Only Knows, he was still creating wondrous music. What is it that sets the song and its recording apart? I mean, when you listen to it, you can hear and feel it. Moreover, who would have guessed from its title that God Only Knows has nothing to do with God, but everything to do with teenage angst?
From your book, actually, Tony Asher said, quote, "God Only Knows is, to me, one of the great songs of our time. I mean, the great songs. Not because I wrote the lyrics, but because it is an amazing piece of music that we were able to write a very compelling lyric to. It's the simplicity, the inference that I am who I am because of you that makes it very personal and tender. This is the one that I thought would be a hit record because it was so incredibly beautiful. I was concerned that maybe the lyrics weren't up to the same level as the music. How many love songs start off with the line, 'I may not always love you'? I liked that twist and fought to start the song that way. Working with Brian, I didn't have a whole lot of fighting to do, but I was certainly willing to fight to the end for that. I was probably saying to myself, God, I hope I'm right about this, because you're never quite sure. But I knew that it would work because by the second part, the real meaning of the song has come out. I'll love you till the sun burns out, then I'm gone. Ergo, I'm going to love you forever. I guess that in the end, God Only Knows is the song that most people remember and love the most.
Isn't that interesting? Because that really does harken back. That whole idea of writing a love song like that harkens back to the 1940s and what Jerome Kern did with The Way You Look Tonight and All the Things You Are. And, you know, those writers demonstrated that you could actually write a love song without ever using the word love.
At first, Brian had planned to have a non-vocal bridge, and he overdubbed a sax solo for the break's second section, which you can actually hear on the box set. Unhappy with the resulting mix, Brian scrapped the idea and created the vocal interlude that graces the final record. And thank God he did that. Only one vocal performance rivals the interlude's intricacy and execution: the round-style ending that's tagged onto the song's final verse. According to Bruce Johnston, it's he and Brian who overdubbed the successive rounds part by part. Bruce said, "There are 3 voices sung by 2 people in the final part of the song, Brian and me. We were at the Columbia Record Studio overdubbing the vocals on an 8-track machine," which I believe, Chuck, is the only place where they had an 8-track recorder at that time. So if they wanted to do anything that involved 8-track recording, they would have to go to Columbia. After Carl finished singing the lead and center harmony parts, he was tired, and Brian sent him home. but we had extra time and open tracks. Brian and I stayed, and the two of us overdubbed additional vocal parts onto the ending, with him singing the top and bottom parts and me singing the middle. Let's actually talk about the recording, specifically first about the backing track. So this was actually one of the last tracks to begin recording. The studio space was pretty small, all things considered, for the 20-some musicians that were hired for this particular session. Carl joined them on this session, playing a 12-string electric guitar. Among the distinguishing features of the arrangement is an echo-laden clip-clop percussion part, sleigh bells played on every beat, and low-range melodic phrases played on flute during the latter sections of the song. A strip of masking tape was placed over the strings of a piano, while the bottoms of 2 plastic orange juice bottles were used for percussion. Bruce Johnston, who joined the band a year earlier, later said that, quote, he didn't realize how great Pet Sounds was going to be until he witnessed this session.
Yeah, this was one of the legendary backing track sessions in all of Hollywood session history, I think. A total of 22 takes were attempted for this song alone. Even though they were the best musicians in the world, many of them struggled to play the instrumental break to Brian's satisfaction. To address this issue, Don Randy suggested to Brian that they play the parts in a staccato rhythm rather than in full quarter notes. Once they did it, Brian enjoyed the effect and incorporated that change. A string section headed by Sid Sharp was subsequently overdubbed onto take 20, and the session ended at 4:30 in the morning. In this instrumental, the French horn really takes center stage, adding a euphoric air to the introduction. Alan Robinson, a 72-year-old veteran of the Utah Symphony and 20th Century Fox Studio Orchestra, recalls the session in vivid detail. At the time, I remember very clearly this interview because I introduced myself and he said to me, I remember the session for God only knows like it happened yesterday. And I'm paraphrasing, but he then began to describe for me detail like almost no one has ever given me on any of the hundreds of interviews I've done on recording sessions. So he told me later, he said, the reason that I have such great recall of this session is because it was so out of my wheelhouse. It was so unusual and fascinating to me. I'd never done a rock and roll session. So I'm glad that I contacted him. He said, quote, I can close my eyes and see the inside of the recording studio. I was called at the last minute. Come right on down here and play, they said. There was no music, and Brian sang the line to me, which was not a problem. I was sitting by myself with a baffle to my right. To my left side was the string section. Behind the string section was Hal Blaine. The percussion section was to his right, the guitars to his left. At 11 o'clock, I could see the control booth. I'm visualizing all this now, 37 years later, and I've played thousands of sessions. I don't know why I remember it so well. I didn't even hear the record until years later. Maybe it's because I thought it was unusual that someone would sing something to me and I'd have to play it.
Let's talk about the vocals. Oh, hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show-per-week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show-a-week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show-per-week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. This episode is brought to you in part by Bespoke LA. Located in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, Bespoke LA is the modern podcaster's dream come true. It's got 2 podcast pods available, one with audio only and the other with both audio and video. Just think, you can start your own podcast tomorrow without investing a single penny in equipment. What, you don't have experience editing? Don't even sweat it. For an additional fee, Bespoke LA can edit your podcast. Or not, it's entirely up to you. Rates start at $75 an hour with discounts if you book 4 sessions at once. Go to bespokela.com/podcast. That's BSPOKELA.com/podcast for more information or to book your time today. And be sure to tell them that Dave sent you for a one-time 25% discount. So the first round of vocal overdubs were recorded later that day at Columbia Studios. Brian sang the lead vocal, after which he mixed rough edits of the song on March 13th and 22nd. These early mixes featured the discarded saxophone solo in its bridge and a different a cappella ending. The ending was a fuller arrangement that included the voices of Marilyn, her sister Diane, and Terry Melcher. In Carl's recollection, quote, "Everybody got in on it. That was fun. We listened to it endlessly." On April 11th, the band returned to Columbia to add further and ultimately final vocal overdubs. This time, Carl took on the lead. Brian may have changed his mind on the lead, partly to address concerns over the large percentage of singing roles that he was granting himself for the album. If that's the reason, then thank God that he did it, because although he does take a great amount, a massive percentage of the album, this song truly belongs to Carl. So Carl quoted the performance instructions that he received from Brian, which was, quote, "Don't do anything with it. Just sing it real straight, no effort, take a breath, let it go easy." He had rarely sung lead on prior Beach Boys songs, and here it was, his best one ever. We can also read into Brian's selection of Carl to sing the lead. Did the lyric cut too close to the bone for Brian to go on record singing the song himself? Carl once said, quote, "I was really grateful to be the one to sing that song. It is so beautifully written, it sings itself." Chuck, let's talk about the release of the song.
At Bruce Johnson's suggestion, Tony Rivers and the Castaways recorded a version of God Only Knows, which was issued about a week before the Beach Boys released their version as a single. Brian had actually wanted to issue God Only Knows as a solo record by Carl. But according to Carl, Good Vibrations, which should have been the next single, didn't turn out the way Brian wanted. So they had to have another release, and so God Only Knows came out as a Beach Boys single. As you mentioned earlier, Dave, on July 18th, the song was issued as the B-side of Wouldn't It Be Nice? That was only in the U.S. Radio programmers ultimately hesitated to add the song to their playlist due to the word God. On September 24th, it peaked on the Billboard charts separately from the A-side at number 39. It was ultimately their last B-side to chart there. Now, in other countries, the sides of the single were reversed, with God Only Knows becoming the A-side. On July 22nd, it was released as the group's third Pet Sounds single in the United Kingdom, debuting at number 30 on the record retailer chart. It peaked at number 2 on August 27th, behind the Beatles' Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby. Responding to the Beach Boys' growing popularity among the British, a promotional film for God Only Knows, directed by the band's publicist Derek Taylor, was filmed for the UK's Top of the Pops on April 25th. The film featured the group, minus Bruce Johnson, at Lake Arrowhead, flailing around in grotesque horror masks and playing Old Maid. The clip originally ran for 5 minutes and incorporated excerpts of Wouldn't It Be Nice, Here Today, and God Only Knows. Due to concerns from the BBC over the horror masks, the clip was later trimmed and recut to feature just God Only Knows.
Man, what a prim culture we had back then. Let's swing things over and talk about the live performances of God Only Knows. Here's a pretty apt quote based on what I've seen from Jim Fusilli, who wrote the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, I believe, 33 and a third book in 2005. One of the few joys of seeing the Beach Boys in concert was to hear Carl sing God Only Knows. Even after adding a few backing musicians, the group really couldn't replicate Pet Sounds in a live setting with their limited instrumentation. But he would offer a sweet, understated God Only Knows that would be the musical high point of the program. And in fact, the version that I think of when I think of God Only Knows being performed live is the Laid in Hawaii version, which is just beautiful. And if you look at the footage, which is in the Beach Boys, an American Band, you see a really fresh-faced, apple-cheeked Carl Wilson really doing a marvelous yet subdued version of the song. So the Beach Boys first added the song to their live set lists on July 28th, 1966, at a concert in Massachusetts. On August 25th, 1967, the band, with Brian, but strangely minus Bruce Johnston, performed God Only Knows at a filmed concert in Honolulu. On September 11th, 1967, the band recorded another studio version of the song. What actually happened is that the master of the Laid in Hawaii performance that was done in Honolulu was deemed unsatisfactory. So they went to a studio to do a replacement version of what was going to be that release. And then that only wound up being for keepsake only, which is unfortunate because all of that stuff is incredible. And it really is a sort of Beach Boys unplugged. During their 50th anniversary reunion tour in 2012, the group played along to a pre-recorded vocal track that was taken from Carl's 1980 performance of the song at Nebworth. Let's talk about the legacy of God Only Knows.
Well, I mean, this song is often praised as one of the greatest songs ever written, as the Beach Boys' finest record ever, and as Carl's best vocal performance. It's also held up as Brian's most quintessential work in toto, meaning writing, production, performance. In 2012, music journalist Dan Caffrey suggested that the descriptor Teenage Symphony to God, originally reserved for the band's Smile album, was much better suited to God Only Knows.
I just want to jump in and say, I don't grab a lot of quotes from other music journalists, but I think that this is a very apt suggestion. This truly is a Teenage Symphony to God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, it's interesting because we almost never hear anything about the Wilson brothers' mom, Audrey, but she actually commented about God Only Knows. She said, "What can you say about it? I still think it's one of his greatest pieces. So many times I've thought how incredible it is that it's my sons who did that song." Don Randy remarked of God Only Knows, that one they should give to every music class and say, "Here, do this one. Do it a cappella. Give them a keynote and see what happens. There'll be a lot of suicides." End quote. I love that. Don is so droll.
Awesome.
So in terms of recognition, God Only Knows has certainly received all of its most well-deserved accolades. In 2004, it was ranked number 25 in Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time.
In 2006, it topped Pitchfork's list of the finest songs of the 1960s.
Then in 2008, Popdose staff members ranked it the best single of the past 50 years.
In 2011, Paste ranked the song number 2 on their list of the 20 greatest Beach Boys songs.
In a 2012 readers poll conducted by Rolling Stone, it was voted the best Beach Boys song. The editors wrote that it had won by a significant margin.
In 2012, it topped Consequence of Sound's list of the 100 greatest songs of all time.
Then in 2016, it topped Paste's list of the 100 best songs of the 1960s.
And in 2021, it was re-ranked number 11 in Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. Basically, at the end of the day, the one adjective that you cannot use for this song is underrated.
Absolutely.
When you talk about cover versions, there are probably way too many for us to even bother listing, but here's just some of the wide variety of artists that have covered it. Andy Williams, Neil Diamond, Olivia Newton-John, Glenn Campbell, David Bowie, Tony Tennille, Joss Stone, Mandy Moore, Michael Stipe, Rivers Cuomo, Avenged Sevenfold, Taylor Swift, and Wilson Phillips. In 2007, Lyle Lovett performed a rendition of the song during Wilson's Kennedy Center Honor Commemoration. Wilson later said it was the best version I ever heard, including the Beach Boys. Of course, Brian is apt to say whatever crosses his mind, whether or not he means it.
Did you know that at one point, after decades of saying that his favorite song of all time was Be My Baby, he took a sudden turn one day when doing an interview and said his favorite song was the Doobie Brothers' What a Fool Believes? That just gives you a little insight into Brian's impulsiveness.
Hey, if you love yacht rock, you can do no better.
I absolutely love that song.
One last thing before we move on to how we connect with it is the plastic orange juice cups. That's Jim Gordon, future great and matricidal man of the hour, Jim Gordon, on the plastic orange juice cups.
Insane.
So let's talk about how you and I connect with this song, Chuck, seeing that we truly do believe that this is something of an emotional concept album.
Well, I absolutely remember being in love with a girl in high school and having a relationship, which only lasted about a year or so. But how do I say this? This song was what I had in the forefront of my mind as what a perfect relationship was reflected as. So this really resonates because I made that connection. Even though I had heard the song years before, I really didn't understand the real meaning of it as, you know, a 10, 12, 13-year-old. But suddenly I'm 16, 17, and I got it. And this became like the touchstone for those years and my adolescence and my adolescent relationship, which I think, by the way, is precisely what Brian intended. He intended to send that message to people like me.
That's a profound way to connect with this. This one does not have a simplistic kind of answer that anyone could really give. And for me, this is a really difficult one because, you know, I am married 10 years now. I got married late in life. I mean, 43 is not young to get married. It's not late, but it's not young. So I'm not like Brian, where I'm just freshly out of the gate and I'm a kid who's still looking at girls. You know, I got married when I believe I was ready to get married. I wasn't, you know, I no longer had really a wandering eye and I was ready to make something work. And I can say that marriage is the most difficult thing I've ever done. And a song that starts with I May Not Always Love You is a song that I can connect with because, in the interest of full disclosure, because I know my wife is not going to be listening to this episode or probably any of the episodes of the Pet Sounds Deep Dive, that I will say that, you know, there's days that I question the meaning of marriage. Aside from the fact that we have a wonderful boy whose existence I never question, but the meaning behind being with someone as a partner through life, which seems very clear cut to me before you do something like that. And then when you're in the midst of it, at least in my relationship, I honestly often have no idea what I'm doing in a marriage, in a relationship. I feel like my expectations are very simple, yet they're almost never met. I mean, something as simple as, feeling loved in a domestic, safe home relationship. I often don't feel that. So I feel a sense of romantic yearning in this song, and I feel a sense of connection that the narrator feels with his partner. But I also feel a sense of trying to connect with the idea of, should this not work out? Because the union of a man and a woman, or the species of your choice, is so random, like closing your eyes and pointing and deciding someone's your soulmate and spending every day of the rest of your life with that person is just so random that you have to be able to attempt to connect with the idea of being by yourself as well. So if life would still go on, believe me, that aspect of the song, I do connect with that. Whether, some untold tragedy happens with either her or I, and one of us is faced with being alone, or because of the fact that, somebody wakes up one day and just decides they don't love the other, or they're not interested any longer. This song opens some very deep bank vault doors.
That is really profound. And you are so much deeper than I am.
Chuck, I'm going to be honest with you, man. The last few weeks, I've spent a lot of time in tears, suffering from a lot of depression. And a lot of it is centered around my relationship and just trying to figure out what it means.
Hey, it's okay, man. I've been there.
And why I'm bothering.
You okay? You want to take a break?
No.
I mean, this is the record that will bring it all right to the forefront, man.
It does. This one does for me.
Yeah, and for as much optimism as it has, and it has a lot of optimism, there's a lot of heartbreak there.
There's a lot of doubt. It's a lot of doubt.
For sure.
And Brian was experiencing a lot of doubt. And it's almost like he knew what was waiting around the corner for him. That's not reflected as much in Smile, at the forefront of Smile.
No, this is it.
That doubt is not there as much. There's a lot of confidence in the Smile work, but the doubt that would trip him up after Smile is very much implanted in these tracks, and the romantic doubt is there, and God only knows.
Well, and just now, I had this kind of thought. Brian was a very young man when he wrote this record, and he intended it for other young men, his contemporaries who were young at that moment, and maybe for young people experiencing love in the future. I don't know whether he ever thought about this or whether he intended this, but think about it. Look how just talking about it and thinking about this music is moving you at your age, and it has moved me at my age when I faced a very similar circumstance to what you're going through emotionally. I don't know if Brian ever thought about or could even foresee that what he was writing would be relevant to someone who's 62, which is my age right now, but it is. And to me, that's just mind-boggling that even though it was written from a very young adolescent's perspective for other adolescents who were going through the same thing at that time, it affects us regardless of age. And I think that's the power. I really do. And the beauty. And as you said, you can feel optimistic listening to this album, but you feel an awful lot of heartbreak, especially when we get to the end of the album and what is my favorite song on the record, next to God Only Knows.
Yeah.
But, it really is. And that to me just underscores the power of music. And I was going to add that when we were younger, you and I, when you were a music lover and you had a passion for music and it affected us emotionally as young people. When you were in a relationship, you would make your significant other a mixtape, and you would put songs that had relevance to your situation, your relationship, your activities together, etc., on the tape as a kind of a sentimental reminder that you love that person. And I very clearly remember starting one such mixtape for that person in high school with God Only Knows, because that was the way I felt. I just think when we think about music, I think of a quote from the book, This Is Your Brain on Music, or Your Brain on Music, I think is what it's called. They did an experiment with Alzheimer's patients who had forgotten who their spouse was. They couldn't identify their own children. They didn't remember their own life story. And yet, if someone sat down at a piano and started to play a song that had been part of that person's life decades before, let's say their wedding song, they suddenly started to sing and they got the lyrics right. And that is how powerfully music imprints our brain. And I don't think there's any other thing other than love that can do that. So to have them together, to bring them together as a songwriter, as a musician, as a composer, as an arranger, and have them augment each other is just, to me, the greatest thing in life.
All right, that about does it. Stay tuned, because next week brings upon us part 2 of my epic interview with Graham Nash, which focuses on CSNY's classic second LP, Deja Vu. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then come Monday, the major tier gets a very special treat. And man, do I mean special. The next entry in the Chuck Granata Pet Sounds interview series is Chuck's chat with Alan Robinson, the French horn player on God Only Knows. There will be a very short sneak peek running publicly for free on Monday morning, but the entirety of the show will only be accessible on the major tier of our Patreon. Don't miss it, or you'll only be getting part of the story. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier gets their early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of the Graham Nash Deja Vu podcast. It's the episode as it was truly intended to be heard, with all the essentials left intact. And then come Friday, everyone else gets to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Chuck Granata, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, Bespoke LA, my mom, my dad, Joe Kennedy for that killer new theme song, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator, and much, much more. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into the classic rock and roll from the 1960s is to go to the Beach Boys Season 1, Catch a Wave, 1961 to 1964, from episode 189 on, the Righteous Brothers Bill Medley interview, that's 181 and 182, my interview with the Free Design, that's 160 to 162, my epic interview with the Mamas and Papas Michelle Phillips, that's 141 to 159, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, that's 137, my 12-hour interview with Terry Kirkman and Jules Alexander from The Association, that's 109 to 113, Vashti Bunyan rating her entire output, that's 103 to 104. Sergio Diaz from Os Mutants, that's 86 and 87. Bert Summer, that's 83 and 84. Sweetwater is episode 79. A tribute to David Crosby, 77 and 78. Andrew Tuttle rates The Monks, 74. Jim Florentine on Black Sabbath is 64 to 68. Lou Barlow on the Zombies is 59 and 60. Marvin Gaye biographer David Ritz rates Marvin Gaye, that's 45 to 47. Blind Faith is 43. Anthony Fantano rates The Velvet Underground, it's 32 and 33. Bob Forrest rates the band is 25 and 27. Monkees manager Andrew Sandoval rates the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. Don Randy rates David Axelrod as 17. Badfinger is 16. The Bee Gees is 10 and 11. Sly and the Family Stone is 5, 6, and 7. And Pink Floyd is 1 and 2. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, September 5th, we're coming at you with Graham Nash on CSNY's classic Deja Vu. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!